Welcome to another episode of the Grappling Arts. The guest for this episode is Sam Benjamin. Sam Benjamin is an award-winning actor known for his role in The War of the Worlds in 2019 and guest turns in Doctor Who and Peaky Blinders. Recently he starred in the Netflix action movie I Am Vengeance, Retaliation in 2020 alongside former wrestler Stu Bennet. As well as acting, Sam is also a writer and director and of course a massive wrestling fan. We discuss Sam's career, the intersections between acting and wrestling, and a selection of Sam's favourite matches, including Goldberg vs Hollywood Hulk Hogan. As always, if you've enjoyed the show, please follow, subscribe and leave a review. Enjoy the episode.
Great. Sounds busy. It's great that you have had the time to be able to join us for a chat about all manner of wrestling. I wanted to do this interview really since as long as we've been doing Grappling Arts, like going back to our kind of conversation where you reached out and was like, wrestling, me too. And I thought this would be a really fun conversation to do on a podcast. So it's great that we've been able to carve out the time to be able to do it. Yeah. Cool. So maybe we'll just dive in. Is that cool?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. In typical Grappling Arts fashion, like the start of a podcast is always like, have we started? Or is this the preamble? That we're never quite sure. So we're really glad that Sam Benjamin is able to join us and to have a chat about wrestling, acting, writing, and probably all manner of other things as the podcast progresses. So Sam, maybe you could just take some time to introduce yourself in any way that you would like to introduce yourself.
Well, let me tell you something, Claire. Hi. My name is Sam Benjamin. I weigh 190 pounds. And I hail originally from Merseyside, England.
Hey.
I am a professional actor, also a screenwriter. I grew up in Merseyside, land of the Beatles, moved to London. A lot of stuff happened between them, but moved to London when I was 22 to go to drama school and graduated from drama school 2009. And so I've been 11 years, 12 years on the road, as Steve Austin might say, hustling for that acting work. And I've done about 35 TV and film jobs, including Peaky Blinders, Doctor Who, The War of the Worlds. I'm a leading role in the Netflix movie I Am Vengeance, Retaliation with Stu Bennet and Vinnie Jones. And I recently filmed my directing debut, a short film called Screw Job, set in the world of professional wrestling. And I'm in post-production for that. And I am also about to star and co-write a feature film, which is a crime caper called The Payday. So that is in production at the moment with an actress called Kyla Fry. So that's me.
Awesome. You're not wrong when you say you're quite busy.
Well, and then just a cherry on the cake is I'm a lifelong wrestling fan. I had this really cool thing. I forget who said it, where I think it was a screenwriter and they're in their 60s and they said, ultimately, he's realized that when you're around 10, you're at that peak age where you've got enough about you to have interests and instinctively gravitate towards things, but you don't yet have shame for liking stuff that you might think that other people think is crap. So he argues that when you're around that age, a lot of the stuff that you're into comes back around in your adult life because you realize, hang on a minute, that's what I loved. So you could say wrestling was that for me. So I've been a fan, I guess, since around 93 was when I fell into it. My mum's childminder had a boyfriend who loved wrestling and he used to bring around VHS tapes. And I remember one of the first ones he showed me had the Narcissus Lex Luger in it. And I've been a fan ever since. I've dropped out a couple times and then swung back in. for various reasons, which we might get into. But yeah, I think it's professional wrestling. I'm in awe of it. I'm in awe of professional wrestlers. I think it's pretty much one of the most impressive professions in the world for all the skills that's required of it, for it to be done well. And yeah, I just can't get enough of it. I spend way too much time listening to it, watching it, all those things. And a lot of different wrestlers have inspired me as a performer and as a writer and as a human as well. So
yeah, I reckon we'll definitely come to some of those things as we go on. So you kind of got into it in like 93. So what was it, do you think, that kind of drew you originally to pro wrestling, this kind of odd, weird thing that we all really love?
I think it went hand in hand with, it's hard to pin down really. I just instantly just got into it, and I think it was obviously the characters you fall in love with, but also I think, I was a big action film guy, even though I was way too young. Saturday nights with my dad would be watching Die Hard, Predator, True Lies with Arnold, and all of those kind of, Stallone, Rocky. So I think initially the attraction was these muscular macho dudes that were heroic, that stopped the bad guys. Perhaps I think it was probably that visceral, you want justice to be served. So just basic drama, I guess. But yeah, and then obviously the physicality of it, just everything about it, the entrance music, the way it just combines so many different things. You've got the music, you've got the moves, you've got the story, you've got also the talking. Like, I love that. And the older I've got, the more I've realized, especially in what I would say in today's WWE era, it's making me realize how just actually the talking might be more important than we think. And it might sometimes be more important than the actual moves, because that sets everything up. So I think I love the talking, the dropping the stuff on the mic, and how everyone had, I remember watching those old Survivor Series VHS videos, and it would have the intro, and each wrestler would give their preamble. Have Jake the Snake giving this really like cold, direct, quiet down the lens, and then Brutus the Barber Beefcake doing some craziness with his scissors. So yeah, it was all of that stuff.
Yeah, great. I think again, you're kind of certainly speaking about, I think, Sam's language as well. We're talking about the importance of like speech and the importance of the story. It's something that we come back to quite a lot on this podcast, actually. So you kind of mentioned that you went to drama school. I wondered if you could just kind of fill us in a bit on that background. You've worked under some really amazing people, some really amazing playwrights. As I was doing my research, I was like, wow, Simon Stevens, and it's great. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that acting background and about your training.
I guess, Drama Studio London is one of the classic drama schools of England, which has a great world reputation. And that was it was classical. You learned your Shakespeare, you learned your Chekhov, you learned all your fundamentals, voice training, combat training, stagecraft, the history of theatre. It was just everything, screen acting, just every element of it. And I worked with some fantastic people. And it was also, I guess, on the job training as well. Because you'd be thrown into these plays and you'd have to perform it in front of an audience. And it was a real sense of discovery, because, there were certain times when the whole ethos of our drama school was for you to find your own way of doing it. No actor's the same. And then what they would do is they'd throw different characters at you that purposely didn't fit you, to see how you did out of your comfort zone. And then the theory being is that when you come out into the industry, you're going to be playing characters that are close to your natural energy anyway. But when the time comes, when you're thrown a challenge and you've got to do a role that requires a certain element of transformation, you have tools to pull on to get away from yourself and step into other people's shoes that are very different to you. And then Simon Stevens was actually a playwriting course at the Lyric Theatre. And that was just amazing fundamentals of story, which sometimes I wonder there's some people in some modern wrestling examples don't know, but it's just all those classic things, like making the bad guys as bad as possible, and then most of the time you got a story. Take a character, your hero, and drag them through hell, and the more hellish their journey, the more you're going to side with them. Stuff like that applies to every art form of storytelling. So that was incredible. Simon Stevens is fantastic.
Yeah, great, brilliant. So I suppose I want to just very briefly touch on something you've already mentioned, which is around like superheroes, just because frankly, because I'm really interested in, because you kind of talk about like Batman. You're on your IMDb, you were like, there's a kind of a bit that says like, massively into Batman as a kid. And I was thinking, interesting. And I feel I'm kind of interested in this intersection of the superhero, wrestling and acting, and how that kind of comes together a little bit. So do you think it was kind of an appreciation of that kind of superhero storylines, but also maybe that superhero physique, which connected you with wrestling a bit, like a love of Batman, but also a love of Hogan, for example?
Yeah. I think that definitely relates to it. There's some kind of crossover, which I'm thinking about how that boils down. I think it's a combination of it's family influences as well. I'm sure I'll talk about my dad when we get to one of the matches that we've mentioned, but the physique thing. I mean, I think, and I'd be interested to hear what you guys think of this, but everyone knows that the physiques in say 86, 89 and 93 looked as a cross section look completely different to the physiques in 2021. And a lot of people have thoughts about that either way. But I think it is true that when you're a kid, seeing out of the ordinary, impressive superhero like He-Man physiques, it does grab your attention, and it's desirable, and it's aspirational, and it's powerful, it's strength. It's all of those things that as a kid you want to latch on to. And when I was a kid, I remember vividly that I hated watching anything that had kids in it. Any story or cartoon where the lead people were children or teenagers, I was like, I don't want to be a kid. Being a kid's crap. I want to be a man. That's what I want to be. And then so I think that tied into it. I don't want to watch some teen thing with these children on their summer holiday and they go on this adventure. I want to watch He-Man or Stallone trying to single-handedly win the Vietnam War. So I think there's something there, and I think maybe that taps into wish fulfillment or just physically it being quite impressive to watch. I don't know.
I had a moment like this yesterday. We were watching after Jericho tweeted out about The Rock. Yesterday we rewatched that Raw from October 2000, I think it is, and China's in that, and so my husband and I were having a conversation about like if I was a kid, which of the women would have inspirational. I was like China, like absolutely, like
100%.
No. And he's like Ultimate Warrior, same reasons, just like these amazing these amazing physiques, and you really feel like there's some work behind them and that they could take on anything. Like you just feel like China could do anything in that, so I totally get that. Come in, Sam.
I've got a question. I think our definitely our fandom overlaps almost identically, because that's 93 is when I started watching wrestling as well. Wonder if was it just watching wrestling, or did you have things like the action figures, and same again in terms of like superheroes, and you mentioned things like He-Man and
oh yeah, totally. I had all the action. I had Batman, I had Thundercats, I had He-Man, and I had my action. I had my wrestling, WWF wrestling figures with the ring, and I used to make an entranceway out of like cardboard boxes, and I'd play the music as well at a certain point, and I'd have. But the thing is, I always remember this as well. I remember when we'd have at school when we had like a toy day and you could bring in toys, and other people would bring in their wrestlers. I was like, I didn't. Maybe this is a hint of my taste, but I wanted it to be really grounded. Like, so on a simple level, if somebody like lifted up their Ultimate Warrior action figure like 30 feet in the air, I'll be like, what are you doing? That's not like, what's going on? that's, like Superman can do that, but this is a sport. What are we doing here? So I do remember that vividly. So yeah, I love the recreation of it and telling your own stories within it. Definitely.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's that kind of fed into your interest in drama and acting? And did you how young were you when you started kind of getting into actual acting roles and stuff like that? Did you act things?
For as long as I can remember, I've wanted to be an actor. So I'd even say since I was in reception, when they said go up and say what you want to be when you're older. I think it's that early, and it was more of a case of losing the dream through the teenage years and it getting beaten out of you by advisors, teachers, and career people, and then rediscovering it. And I was lucky because I rediscovered it when I was 16. Rather than rediscovering it when I was 50, unhappy and working as a lawyer. So yeah, it definitely played a part in all the vocal elements of it. Like as an actor, I've always been quite skilled at accents. And even someone the other day, they said, oh, like how come your American accent's so flawless and you can do all these different American accents? And I think in hindsight, it's because I was doing impressions of, Bret Hart and Macho Man and Mean Gene and all these people, and doing the commentary. That was a key element of playing with the action figures, doing the commentary. So all of that, I think, definitely played into it. Doing voices definitely was an outlet, but also it fed the acting.
Yeah. Maybe that kind of leads us very seamlessly on to thinking about how you think wrestling has made a kind of broader difference to your acting or your writing or the characters that you create. I mean, there are some obvious films and acting roles that we could mention here, including kind of Iron Vengeance, but maybe there are other things as well that you in your TV characters and like that, ways that wrestling has sort of influenced your style, or you had a moment where you've been in a particular role and thought, this is like wrestling, or you've been reminded about something perhaps.
I think I mean, obviously, because I know I've grown up on wrestling, to me it's inseparable in the sense that not only have you got the elements of the actual lifestyle, there's a parallel in terms of paying your dues, working for low money early on or no money in front of crap audiences or small audiences, doing what you think might be amazing stuff but nobody's seeing it, and fighting to get your shot, to get to be seen, to get a chance, to get that agent to see you, to get that casting director to give you permission to come in and show what you can do. All of the packaging yourself, making videos and putting it on whatever social media it might be. So there's that element, but then the other element of where a character fits in with a story. When you get a film, I've played some characters that are, I've played a policeman who's in 3 scenes in a Peaky Blinders episode, and you have to recognize what his role is in the story. Like you're not there. And this is another thing that I think happens a lot now, is if you're the 3rd match in and the main event is, the world championship match in a cage, it's your job tonight is not to outdo the cage match. Your job tonight is to facilitate that journey to make the whole thing work for the audience in the maximum way possible. So if you're in the Peaky Blinders, as an example, I was a policeman, and at first he seems like he's an honest guy, but the twist is that he's paid up by the gang. So again, it's like, you think he's a face, but then he heel turns, and then that's the dramatic moment. So there's loads of elements of how your character fits into it, but then also, I guess one of the things that swims around a lot now, I've been doing it for over 10 years. And one thing that I started becoming aware of and using from wrestling, whether it be for an audition, whether it be for how I promote myself, or how I play characters, is you start to go, well, hang on a minute. What is my gimmick? Why would anyone employ me? It's like I could audition for a role, and now I can see the role on paper and recognize that you probably want someone else to do that. You want me to be the ringmaster? I can do it if you're paying me, no probs, but you probably want to get someone who fits better. And then and then later on you go, oh, then you start to realize, what can I do that other people can't do? Steve Austin can play a Texan redneck beer guzzling anti-authoritarian guy better than he can play some cold ringmaster managed by Ted DiBiase character. Similar to, we're going to talk about it, but Bret Hart, when he had that pro-Canadian, anti-American, thing, it was tapping into his own energy. And I think once I started, I'm not saying I figured it all out, but once you start to recognize, hang on, what is my gimmick? If someone didn't know me and they were like, yeah, let's bring Sam Benjamin in, why would they bring me in? I'm a white guy. I'm in my 30s. I've got dark hair. You know what I mean? I could fit into many different characters, but who are you? What is your energy? What is your persona? Are you the guy that does this? Are you the guy that does that? So Daniel Day-Lewis, his gimmick is that he can transform into anyone you want. Whereas Tom Cruise's gimmick is that he can run really fast, and he can do action. He can do hard emotion. Every actor, when you start to analyze it, has their gimmick. Arnold's gimmick is that he's a physique. Like, that's his main gimmick. In the same, Philip Seymour Hoffman played angry, swearing, bitter characters that you still loved because he was so direct. All those things. So you start to work out, what is my gimmick and how can I lean into it, and then more work comes. So I guess that'll be the main way that it's helped.
Yeah, such an awesome answer. Thank you so much for sharing that, and that's amazing. Sam, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk wrestling. Well, I'm going to kind of keep busting in, but you mentioned already, Sam, a couple of wrestling matches that you sent through to us so we could talk it out today. I was made up with the ones you sent, and I'll turn it over to Sam for the chat.
I'm trying to think what would be the best orders to start in. I think possibly I want to start with the Goldberg Hogan match, actually, from Nitro. I guess firstly I could see why you selected all three matches, and I felt that all three matches had something in common.
Ooh.
And that being exceptional audiences for each of those matches that were exactly where you would want them to be for those matches. But then also this kind of sense of spectacle and occasion, and also the fact that all three of them have a kind of place in wrestling lore, I guess. They're both sort of fairly steeped, all three matches, are fairly steeped in kind of mythology. So I wondered, what was your rationale for kind of selecting matches?
It was a tricky one. The truth is that obviously you got to whittle it down to three, which I think was the brief. There are honorable mentions out there, which might even be my go-tos for greatest matches ever. For example, Bulldog Bret at SummerSlam 92 and Austin Bret Hart WrestleMania 13. But both of those, I feel like everybody knows they are classics. So I wanted to point out ones that people know, but some people might not have seen or actually appreciate. So with Goldberg versus Hollywood Hogan, 98 at the Georgia Dome, for me, the more I think about it, I think it could be my favorite match. And I think because in truth, I watched it with my dad on TV, on TNT, and I was so invested in that match. And I think, first of all, I think it's unprecedented because it was a weekly TV show and the Georgia Dome was full. As far as I know, WWE have never done that. As far as I know, they haven't had that kind of crowd. So I wanted to put across a little bit of how actually WCW, for all its flaws, had some of the greatest moments in wrestling in the 90s. And to me, that match was the pinnacle of what pro wrestling can be. A crowd that desperately wants the hero to beat the villainous champion in a hometown crowd, and everyone was behind him, and it had been building for about a year and a half, and it was patient, and Hogan was just at the time the ultimate dick. He was the champ. He cheated in every match. And because he used to be a fan favorite, he was additionally easy to hate because back in the day he won fair and square, and now he's just lazy and cowardly and wants his cronies to help him all the time. And it was, and they really did. I think another thing that doesn't happen as much now is, even though as a kid I was furious every week, they really did make the bad guys win week on week on week on week. and they'd show a glimmer. Like one week the Steiners had come in and like clean house a bit, but then get beaten down by 20 NWO guys, and it would just kept on going on. And then a hero would potentially emerge, and then he'd move to the NWO. So then you just had this, and then Goldberg was the antithesis to the NWO. Just no gimmicks, black trunks, an athlete. And one of the special things about that as well, in addition to how it played out and how big the crowd was, and just how it had every little, it was quick, it wasn't too long either, and it had the right element of, there was a bit of shenanigans, but heroes from the back came in and prevented the shenanigans. So again, you're playing with the audience, because then as soon as, like, I think it was Kurt Hennig starts walking down, you're like, no, don't, oh no, come on. And then, you know, you had a celeb appearance, DDP, who was one of the other solo heroes of WCW. And as well as that, Goldberg, my dad was an amateur boxer, and he was one of those people like, oh, wrestling, oh, that's just play fighting, what do you watch this for? And then I used to watch Raw on a Friday night at my dad's at the weekend. And then one week I turn up and he's like, are you going to be watching that Raw tonight? And I went, well, yeah, I was planning to. And it was on Sky Sports. And he goes, you don't want to watch that. You want to watch this other one on TNT. And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, oh, you got to see it. There's this guy Goldberg. He's a beast. So Goldberg converted my dad to wrestling. And so the other thing I love about that match is you look at the crowd. It's not wrestling fans. It's every kind of person. It's different ages, teenagers, lads getting hammered. There's women, there's older people. There's kids. I love that mix and diversity of people that are in there just to watch a hero win, rather than like, ooh, let's watch some impressive moves. They didn't care what the moves were. They were waiting for the 3 count. So those are the reasons why that match stands out. And I can still watch it. I get goosebumps. Like when I can't think of a moment when Goldberg lifts him up, or when he spears him, and the crowd, you just get shivers. It's like 70,000 people willing him to. I can't think of another match for me that had a bigger crowd support. Maybe like Hogan back in the 80s, perhaps. But yeah, I just think it's magnificent.
Yeah, and there's also the stuff around, because I remember watching it. I think me and a friend who's kind of like my best friend, and he would record either Raw, and when we'd watch either Raw or Nitro, and we'd record the other one and watch it on a Saturday. And I think he came around to mine on a Saturday with the VHS tape that was used each week to record it.
Love it.
And we watched it, and I remember watching the build to it as well. And even things like the contract being signed the week before. But then also the whole episode of Nitro, I think if you'd watch it in isolation, it's brilliant. But stick through the whole episode of Nitro, the way they build it throughout the episode is really, really good. And then the Goldberg entrance where he's in the locker, is so captivating. Like I could just Goldberg entrance. I don't really care what happens, in the ring once he beats them, but just the entrance and the spectacle of that crowd chanting, but the Goldberg chant. Yeah. Again, one of the best chants.
Yeah. And I think
accompanied by security guards as well and all that sort of stuff.
And in addition to that, you just prompted me to think, like, when you think of the entrance, other things that WCW at the time did so well, Michael Buffer on doing the intros, like it made it legit. And how detailed his descriptions was. He made it like a sport. He'd read off the match record, what their finisher move was. Their weight would be to within the half pound. And, hailing from here, played for the Atlanta Falcons, everything. And then even Hogan reaming off all of his history, 5-time world champion, which was significant in 98. And as well, I don't know whether you picked up on this one or rewatched it, is the commentary from Shivani and Heenan. And the fact that if you watched Hogan era in the 80s with Heenan, and how Heenan was a heel commentator and you hated him. And now Heenan was so desperate. He'd had enough of the NWO, and he was like, finish him off. And it was like, you hadn't heard that kind of, but it was really realistic. It wasn't, you didn't get the feeling he was getting piped in to say it. It was almost like it was for their jobs. That's how high stakes it was. So yeah, all of that.
Yeah, it's something that I think that was probably the reason why WCW was ahead at that point, was that they were able to make every episode of Nitro feel like it was. I think even Schiavone was, one of his cliche comments would be, it's one of the biggest nights in the history
of our sport.
He'd say that every week. But it did feel like it at the time as well.
I love that line as well. I love that line.
So then, I guess so the other one would be, and it's probably, I mean, it's about a year, isn't it? A year before is the Stampede.
In Your House Canadian Stampede.
Yeah. So what was it about that match then that drew you to it? So
I chose this match because, again, I think it might be one that not everybody knows about. I don't know. I'll be interested to hear where you guys stood on this, but when I'll go into a bit of my personal connection to this. So obviously, I don't know about you two, but as a Brit, Davey Boy Smith, the British Bulldog, and in that vein of what I said before of non-childish, heroic, masculine men, every single example of that growing up in the 90s was American. Davey Boy Smith was the only British, aside from James Bond, the only British action superhero, like international star that I could root for, that was from my home country. And in addition, obviously, I'm from the Northwest as well. So not too far away. So I was always behind Bulldog. And then Bret Hart for me is probably the best in-ring storyteller of all time. So pair that backstory. And I remember, and also I absolutely, in the 90s, I absolutely despised Shawn Michaels. And when all of that backstory, and then when Bret came back and he started getting he was doing this like crybaby thing of like saying, dropped a great promo where he shoved Vince McMahon on the floor, which I actually think is the beginnings of Attitude. I think he doesn't get enough credit for what he started with, the way he started to say, this is BS, swearing and saying I'm the best, just really vivid and real. And then I just had a sensation that I thought even though they wanted people to side against Bret, I was like, no, he is getting screwed. Psycho Sid interfered with this. Shawn Michaels dodged the WrestleMania match, and now he's back again. Like, was he injured or not? And then all of this stuff. And then when there was a Raw where Owen and Bulldog started to fall out, and they were fighting each other, and then Bret came out and then was like, guys, we need to stick together. It's these fans, these American fans, that turned you on us. And so obviously, because Bulldog was in it and because Bret was in it, I was all in. It didn't matter what they said from that point on. I was there. Like, Canada and Britain were doing this, baby. And then the more the American fans didn't like it, the more I got into it. And the Canadian Stampede felt like a culmination, and it was like the peak of that storyline, which I think has never been touched even close to such a unique dynamic, with it being so partisan in different territories of the world, and one character being a heel and then going to another town and being flipped. And I think it was just so, and then when you watch the match, again, something that I love, completely partisan crowds, hostile, aggressive crowds that really want their heroes to win. And you can tell, like, Steve Austin's loving every minute, because he's obviously used to being the hero, but like he's doing like low blows and fingering the audience, and he's getting booed. And I just think it's I think it was just also, it's almost like a commemorative showcase of 10 of the best stars of an era. And when you go back now, you're like, oh my, like, oh, hang on, Jim Neidhart, Owen Hart, Brian Pillman, and then you're like Shamrock, Goldust, Legion of Doom, Steve Austin. And again, it's just so much star power. And they, I could be wrong, but I get the impression that they really were just feeling the audience, and they had them in the palm of their hand at every moment of it, even though there was nothing theoretically riding on it. At the same time, everything was riding on it. It was pride. And yeah, I just thought it was a really good moment in time, which kind of, it sums up that Canada-America rivalry storyline with Bret Hart, because I think we all get distracted by the Montreal screw job later on, but I think we forget that and like 97, and you know, everyone talks about the Attitude Era, but I thought 97 for WWF was one of the best years before Bret Hart left. Even his match with Undertaker at SummerSlam was just masterful, where he was going to never wrestle in America again if he didn't win. But then Michaels was the ref, and even as a kid, I'm thinking, who's going to win? Who is going to win this? Because Michaels he's the ref. He's not going to let Bret win. And then, but you know, so yeah, Stampede. I just think it's a fun partisan match with lots of stars in it. There's just a real, you know, the camera shakes from the building. So yeah.
Claire, any thoughts on that one?
I mean, that's what stood out for me really, was like, for all three really, but particularly perhaps for this one, was like the amazingly partisan crowd. And I was sort of mulling over like how you could do this now, whether there'd be a possibility or a way of doing this now. And like, I wonder if the UK would be a place where you could have, you know, if you had a British
stable
guy who was a heel in WWE and they came over and like and you know, that would be, because I like, for me, like, not, you know, unlike you two, I didn't grow up with wrestling. My mum thought it was like super dangerous and like there's no way she would have had that. But
at least she believed.
You know, she still believes.
Yeah.
I've already had this conversation with her like weekly. She's like, but they really hurt you. I'm like, Mum, right, okay. Do. So I'm not winning. Like it's yeah. She's entirely in kayfabe. But like for me, like the Bulldog was someone who transcended like wrestling. So I knew who Undertaker was, I knew who Hulk Hogan was, and I was terrified. Undertaker terrified the life out of me. Hogan wasn't interested. Bulldog, on the other hand, I was like, oh cool, yeah, he's cool. Yeah. Like so I even as a kid I kind of understood that he was cool, and he in essence represented me. So I agree in this match. I also felt really part of that kind of partisan crowd. So it's a match I've watched relatively recently actually, and then watched it again for this, which was really nice. And normally I'm kind of quite an Austin fan. Like I know I would get behind Austin, but on this I was like totally behind, behind the Canadians and Brits. Let's do this, you know. Yeah. So in essence, it kind of flips the watchers as well in kind of an interesting way. So yeah, it was cool.
I thought it was interesting. So in terms of the actual match and the kind of way the match was structured, I thought it was very interesting. Like I'm going to assume that Bret is calling nearly the whole match because he's the master storyteller, like you said at the time. But the fact that him and Austin start the match, I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
Go at it straight away, 100 miles an hour. And I'm thinking when I'm watching that back, it's like, you normally think about the match in terms of the audience and taking the audience and building the atmosphere. And when the audience reaches the kind of hottest point is when you hit, you know, your biggest moves or whatever. Because the audience is already so hot, Bret starts at 100 miles an hour because he doesn't need to bring it up to 100 miles an hour. And it's just a really clever, because the other way you would do that is probably the more typical way would be to keep those two apart for
and then even have Austin. When Austin, like as the heel, would tag out when Bret comes in, you could and then get boos. But yeah, it was just because they had. But the thing is, it fitted in, like you say, with it was one thing I love about that match. It was logical. And Bret is all about logic, isn't he? But it's like, well, hang on a minute. I'm the team captain of this team. You're the team captain of that team. Let's see I'm going to finish it right now. That you can imagine that was, if it was a film, it's like, I'm going to finish this. And he's like, well, come on then. Like, I'm going to finish it. We're not going to need any of these people. We're going to get to it. And then even like, I don't know whether but there's a little touch that I always love that I thought, again, something that's so organic and similar to acting, don't play the So you learn your lines, you learn your script, you learn your character, but sometimes, and you're like, right, that line, oh, I'm gonna deliver this line like this. It's gonna do this. It's gonna bring the house down. You walk into the set, and then the actress turns up, and it's a different energy, and the set's different to what you thought it would be, and the director's wanting something different, and she does something to you that you weren't expecting. So now your planned delivery is now pointless and wrong and untruthful. And it's like, you see it where like Shamrock tags in, and then Neidhart comes in, who's never been in a UFC fight in his life, and he starts doing this like UFC style like guard, and as if to be like, well, come on then, let's you want to play your game, rather than just doing, oh, I'm Jim Neidhart, this is my move set.
Yeah,
just little things like that I really love, just organic stuff. You don't have to, what do they call it? You don't have to fit in all your shit in every match.
Yeah.
So I think that was what was great. And the finish wasn't a particular, like, it wasn't a obvious finisher move, climax. It was like a sports, like, he got the 3.
Yeah.
Love it.
And then the chaos at the end was really fun as well. Like the grabbing Stu Hart and then clocking Bruce Hart and all the Harts over the barrier.
Yeah.
Who did Bruce punch? Didn't it? Because I heard, didn't he like really hit him for real or something? Who was it?
I'm not sure of the background. I know
Bruce. Yeah, Bruce hit someone, and I think the person he hit, in hindsight, was like, yeah, he laid that in. Not gonna lie. Can't remember who it was.
He's an odd character, Bruce Hart. If you read Bret Hart's autobiography, he comes with some interesting stuff. Bruce Hart. And again, I liked that it was reflective of the atmosphere of the audience. Like the match itself was really unhinged.
Oh yeah, they were rabid. They were just so into it. Like, and I love that feeling that, and I'm sure we'll get onto with the next match, but and it is harder now because of the internet and exposure and all of this. It is really hard, but I do think if I was running a wrestling promotion, I would be striving for that level of audience investment. I want a sensation that the TV viewer is thinking, if that wrestler ends up in the middle of that crowd, they're gonna get some cheeky, shots to the face or something. Someone's going to throw a beer over them, or, just that little element of, obviously you hear stories from the 70s and 80s where, people are coming out of like the deep South and people are waiting with knives and guns and things. You don't want that, but I think just that right element of within the arena, just that little bit of, I guess the only thing I can think of recent times was maybe like CM Punk against Cena, when it was that level of investment, which obviously you had the hometown thing, you had the high stakes, element of it. But I'm trying to think of other moments when the crowd was just like, what? Even because the other total shocked crowd investment moment I thought was Goldberg and Lesnar, when Goldberg shocked him with a quick win.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are the kind of moments that I think professional wrestling is all about. That's when I heard someone once say, they were like, oh, why'd you still watch wrestling? It hasn't been great for years, they said. And then the other person said, I know it hasn't been as great for years, but if I just get that one moment, it'll be worth it. I just get that one moment, like once a year or once every 2 years, it's untouchable.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sam, it just reminds me a little bit of we had a conversation with Sugar Dunkerton last week, and one of the things that he said that I've been mulling over ever since is that, like, wrestling should look like an actual fight. And I know that sounds like a really obvious thing to say, but actually quite a lot of wrestling doesn't look like an actual fight at all. And he's like, of course, occasionally you're going to, like, in an actual fight, you're going to slip, or you're going, like, it's not a botch, it's a fight. And like, there's going to be these chaotic moments. And I was really reminded of what he said there as I watched this match. I was like, it felt to me like a real fight, and it was all the better for it. Like, it was just on the edge of chaos the whole time, and very, very exciting in that way,
Yeah, I was only going to add that I think that maybe the great moments are more spaced out these days. but also, like, I imagine if you went back and watched the rest of that in your house show, it was probably pretty awful up until that main event.
But that I mean, awful's a strong word, Sam. But what I'll say to that is, and I've heard, you know, I listen to, I'm sure you guys, well, I don't know whether you do, but I listen to a lot of podcasts with, you know, all the old bookers like Vince Russo, Jim Cornette. I listen to them all, and you know, sometimes Jim Cornette says, when you're doing a pay-per-view, not every match is meant to be a 20-minute epic, which is, you know, sometimes when I stopped watching WWE for about a year, but I think a big part of that was the lack of crowd. I just couldn't. It's just a personal thing. I found it totally unwatchable, and I thought the way AEW did the outdoor thing was watchable, and it helped that, you know, also they were doing some more interesting stuff. But what was my point to that? I've just completely gone blank. I can't remember now. What was I going to do with me for?
Cornette, 20 minutes.
Oh yeah. So yeah, and Jim Cornette was saying, like, and I think NXT is so guilty of this at the moment. I hadn't watched it for a while. Turned on the latest pay-per-view just to think, oh, what's the recent pay-per-view? And the first match was like felt like it was like 25 minutes, and I'm like, I mean, I know these guys are skilled, but this doesn't need to be 25 minutes. And if every match has to be at least 15 minutes, there's no, you talked about being on the edge of chaos, there's no jeopardy, because you can relax, because you go, oh, well, I don't really need to pay attention because they're probably going to do some spots for about 10 minutes and then they'll start to build to the finish. You do need a match that lasts a minute. You do need a match where someone gets the upper hand quick and it ends in 3 minutes, or someone gets a quick pin, or you need to mix it up. Otherwise, like you say, it's like if you watch, you know, how many times I remember when, you know, when pay-per-view in boxing started coming in the 90s, and my dad like paid 50 quid for Tyson Bruno and it was over in 10 seconds. And you're like, oh, what? But you need one of them every now and then, because then when you do get a 15 round, you know, Tyson Fury fight to the finish, then it means something rather than fight forever for every match. So I think it is all about, like you said, Claire, I think, you know, it should be like UFC, but the only difference is that the matches have choreographed finishes. That's yeah. You know, and a lot of, you know, Conor McGregor, he's straight out of professional wrestling with his promos. So
yeah,
it's just something that kind of came up in the episode with Tanisha, didn't it, Claire, where we were talking about Bianca Belair and Sasha Banks, and
I love that match actually.
Yeah,
Thunder Rosa, because I think there is a trend in NXT and now in WWE of sort of kind of overproduced matches, where you get quite a lot of matches that just, yes, if you watch them on their own, you'd be like, okay, that's a great match. But if you watch a pay-per-view of 5 of them, you can kind of see the production a little bit more. Whereas I think certainly the era that you've kind of flagged up matches from, those will all be kind of called on the fly in the ring, really, apart from the, and you can see a little bit more of the kind of the struggle and the figuring it out as you go along, rather than the sort of more highly choreographed style that you see today. Yes. So that's maybe a good transition into the other match that you selected. Felt like I say, there were a lot of similarities, but also kind of somewhat different in terms of its the time that it took place. So 1985, and I wondered, because knowing kind of loosely what your age is, what was the reason for going back to 1985 in particular, NWA? So it's NWA's Starrcade 85, Tully Blanchard, and Magnum TA I Quit match. So yeah, what was
in
the
a cage?
Yeah.
In a cage.
For the United States Championship. Interesting story of how I got into this one. And I think I went on a journey with a friend of mine called Robin Owen. We met at university and we bonded over wrestling straight away. We still do. We have a weekly chat about AEW Dynamite. And we set up on this mission, and we kind of lapsed midway through, not mainly just because of our lives kind of became busier and we haven't quite got it back together, but we decided to start a podcast because again, part of that agenda I mentioned earlier is history is written by the winners, and actually WCW and NWA have some of the greatest moments in wrestling. And so we just it was originally his idea. He said, why don't we go back and watch every Starrcade in order and do a podcast episode about each? So we're like, yeah, that sounds great, because I've always missed, like, I think we all know, don't need to talk about it too much, but when WCW got bought by WWF, it's never been the same since. And I've always missed WCW. And so we thought, yeah, let's go back and watch the Starrcades. And then it was an education, because we started at Starrcade 83 and we couldn't believe what we were watching. It was like going from watching, say, 2014 WWE, and you turn on Starrcade 83 and you're like, it's presented like Sky Sports. It's like it's total, no irony. This is how it is. It's messy. It's like a sports broadcast. And some of the matches are like, some dude in trunks versus another dude in trunks. One of them's young, and it's literally just, yeah, that's the match. And, oh, well, he's an up-and-comer. He's got, he managed to get that move in, and maybe we'll get to see it. And some of the finishes are a bit odd, but like boxing, it's like, oh, is the referee called for the, oh, yeah, the referee said that's it. Okay, well, I guess that's it. So-and-so's the winner. And also the commentary from, everyone, people like Jim Ross talk about Gordon Soley and Bob Caudle, and their commentary is so grounded. It was a culture. It was like having a cold shower. It was so grounded, and they were making what we would now call a rest hold. They're making rest holds lasting for 4 minutes, really interesting, talking about the anatomy and what's happening when someone applies this hold and all this stuff. And so anyway, we got to Starrcade 85 and we were warmed up into the style. And first of all, Magnum TA, I remember Dusty Rhodes saying he had a tragic accident. And if he hadn't have had that accident, he was like, he would have been our Steve Austin. Like, no question. For 5 years, he would have been like as big as Steve Austin was in the 90s. And I think he's got a point. Because he just had, as you can see, if everyone goes back and watch that match, the crowd are behind him so much. He's kind of a hard man, but he's still got, like, you can hear the girls screaming as well. And so anyway, so I discovered it later on is the answer to the question, these old Starrcades. And that Magnum, there's many matches that stick out that I always try and get people onto, but I really wanted to pick something from that Starrcade era to hopefully just anyone who's never been that far back to just watch it and go, oh, wow, this is what wrestling can be. And what we were talking about before, this is two guys who have a grudge, who want to hurt each other. Simple as that. And it's how a cage match should be. And there's a different flavor for every fan, and you don't want every match to be like this. And I'm not a huge hardcore or weapons blood match guy, but when it's called for and you're in a steel cage and it's an I Quit match, then it's probably going to involve blood. So these two just go at it, and you watch it again and you go, were there that many like wrestling moves in it? Not really. And just reminding you the simple things, like there's one bit where, I think Magnum TA like clocks him with the right hand, and Tully Blanchard like falls back and falls between the ropes, like down to the bottom of the cage. And you can just tell he's just completely helpless. And it's just reminding people of little things like that are actually really horrendous. If that actually happened, and the selling is so, I hear people talk about, obviously they're the experts, not me, but I hear Steve Austin on his podcast talk about the lost art of selling, and these guys sell, and it just becomes, it's logical, because me and my mate Robin, when we were watching it, we couldn't believe how brutal it was. And they're literally shoving the microphone into each other's face at every possible moment, shouting. I don't know whether you noticed this, but the shouts and the dialogue on the microphone between them is horrendous. And like, it's really violent. It's like, say it, and he's like, no, and it's like, but it's realistic. It's like, this guy's trying to jab, a wooden chair into his eye. And it's like, it's like a bar fight. So I think, to me, it's something, again, maybe this is my agenda, but a reminder of what is possible with pro wrestling. It can be a real fight, and you 3 minutes in, you forget that it's pro wrestling. It's who's going to win. So for all those reasons, I think it's one of the best brutal matches I've ever seen.
There's loads of things that I love about that kind of era, and yeah, I've kind of, as a fan, dug into quite a lot of those older matches. I really love the entrance, like Tully's entrance. It's just really kind of cinematic, actually, and it sort of feels. And I love the film, and the quality of the filming, I think, is really nice. Like, it has a really kind of, obviously it's old, but it feels like film. It doesn't. It has a kind of look about it which I really like, and the lighting I really like. And as soon as that kind of entrance finishes, it's then offset with this real kind of kitchen sink, just brutalism, and the kind of really quite barbaric. And then, because there's other matches of that, I'm not sure if it's the same Starrcade or if it's maybe one earlier, which is Greg Valentine and Rowdy Roddy Piper.
Street fight. Horrendous.
Again, reaches, and I think both of them bleed very, very heavily. But so I had like a conversation about hardcore wrestling and deathmatch wrestling with a wrestler, and one of the ways that she was describing it, or one of the reasons that she felt it was a really powerful way of wrestling, is that we can all kind of relate to a lot of the kind of acts of violence in those type of matches, whereas a lot of wrestling we can't, as an audience, necessarily, like, I don't know. I mean, I do know what it's like to fall in a wrestling ring, but most people don't know what a power bomb would feel like, or what a body slam would feel like. But a metal fence, or cutting
barbed wire,
cutting yourself, that's like, to have a paper cut, to bang your arm on something metal, like, it brings in a kind of extra level of tension. I think.
And because there's a bit when I think off the back of that, obviously deathmatch wrestling and all that is a completely different scene, and there's an audience for that. But for me, what I think separates this and what I think has been lost a bit now is that if you do have some kind of street fight or hardcore match, the more you use weapons that seem like they're going to take longer to get the win, the more silly you look. So it's like somebody, the chair gets thrown in, and then Tully Bland, he's not going to pick up the wooden chair and smash it over him. He's going to smash the chair, pick up a stake from it, and jab it into his eye. That is efficient, and that's brutal. Whereas, setting up, I think the problem is, this is just obviously my taste, is when you have a hardcore match, like ladder matches now, they've jumped the shark, because they're not really trying to get the belt at the top of the ladder. They're trying to set up stunts for the audience. But if you're trying to set up stunts for the audience, it makes me not like you, because you haven't got integrity, because you're not trying to win. Whereas both these guys are trying to win, like that, at all costs. And I think that's really powerful in a hardcore match. Like, even you think about, this just popped in my head, and it was horrendous, but when The Rock against Mankind, I think at a Royal Rumble, and it was an I Quit match.
Yeah, it was brutal.
And like, even though it's horrendous, and I don't necessarily want wrestlers to sacrifice themselves this much, but if you didn't care and all you wanted was the belt, you would handcuff a person and hit them over the head until they quit. That's logical. It's brutal, but it's logical. So I think that's what I love about this match, and I think a lot of modern matches, it doesn't have to be, that's the thing as well, bring it back to basics. A wooden chair, that's all. A wooden chair and a microphone, that's brutal. You don't need all the bells and whistles necessarily, so that's what I love about it.
And I agree, and sorry, Sam.
No, go ahead.
No, I think I totally agree, and I actually recently rewatched that Rock Mankind match as well. I watched it through my hands because it's horrendous. Amazing, but horrendous. And I agree, and I wonder if you had anything, either of you had any thoughts about the audio in this, because I had to turn my TV down because of the discussion on the mic, which was just like ear-bleedingly loud. But made loads, in terms of just what you've been saying there, Sam, about like, I believe this is a fight. Like, if you're in a fight and somebody tells you to quit and you're not going to quit, you're going to be shouting that at the top of your lungs, and you're going to have distortion on the mic. So rather than kind of cleaning it all up and making it all kind of perfect, the distortion on the mic is like, for me, kind of, it sits alongside the stabbing in the eye with the wood. Like, they are theatrical devices actually to create a scene, both at the same time. They come together, and yeah, I've never seen this match before and was gobsmacked by it. Had no idea.
Amazing.
So thank you for sharing.
Oh no, that's great.
Maybe you have some thoughts about that audio thing, perhaps.
I think there was something really clever about how it was, and this comes back to what you said right at the start about how it kind of, and this is a bit of an assumption because I've not watched the kind of build up to it, and I know it was a match that was built, and a lot of the, the crowd reaction, the reason it's quite famous is there was a very, very long build to the point where everyone in that arena knew that these two people wanted to kill themselves, kill each other, not themselves. But it does sort of set aside wrestling, doesn't it? It's like, okay, well, this is a wrestling match. Let's put this to one side and pretend to actually try and kill each other.
Yeah, well, yeah. And it's well, first of all, Claire, what you said about the audio, like me and my mate Robin, when we watched it, we were traumatized by the audio. And the thing is it's the simple things. Again, it's seeing two grown men who look that macho and with those physiques, and like I mean, McIntyre's got a great physique, he looks macho. Tully Blanchard just looks dangerous, and hearing those guys scream like that, it's that's what happens when if you've ever, when you witness a real fight, that's the kind of things that's the kind of thing that shocks you, and it's that element of it. And then I also think, off what you said, Sam, and again, I can't remember who said the quote. It was a wrestler from the 80s, I think, and he said, I might not be able to make you believe that wrestling is real, but I can make you believe that I'm real.
Yeah.
And it's like one of those where it's like similar to Bret Hart and Steve Austin when they fought at WrestleMania. You watch that match now, and at the beginning you're like, I know this isn't legit, but these two people hate each other and they are going to beat the crap out of each other, and not in a kind of, because in a safe way. So I think there's a lot of confusion because I'm not one of those fans that, like, I don't like seeing wrestlers do stiff, realistic stuff like that. I'm not a big what do they call it? The strong style. Like, obviously there's different levels to that, and a bit of it, and a bit of stiffness and all that. Some wrestlers, make it work really well. But I think I'm not here to see you guys hurt yourselves on purpose. That's why it's better than UFC and boxing, is because I want you guys to like entertain me, but not destroy your bodies as well. And that's the art of wrestling, I think. So, and even though these two guys are bleeding and all that, you do get the impression that it goes too far, really. So yeah, it's a bit of a masterclass, and I hope anyone who's listening goes and checks it out if they haven't checked it out before, like Magnum TA, Tully Blanchard, and then stay after it for the Ric Flair main event against Dusty Rhodes.
Yeah,
you'll start to that with watching this era of Starrcade, because I remember, I don't know about you growing up, Sam. Obviously, Claire, you came to it a bit later, but I remember you'd hear wrestlers going, "Oh, Ric Flair's the best of all time," and I'd be like, "Really?" Like, really? Because I'd only seen him in like 90s WWF. And you go back and watch these Starrcades, he can make an hour match. He talks about his hour-long matches, but some of his Starrcade main events with Dusty, with Lex Luger, with Harley Race, and he's just incredible.
Yeah, the Harley Race one's a really good one to go back and watch. I think that's a cage as well, isn't it? I think
83 was him against Harley Race, and then I think the return match was a cage in 84, perhaps. And then 85 was against Dusty, and then there's a later one where he where Lex Luger is this like young sports like gifted athlete who's given a shot, and it's a really good story to that one.
Yeah, brilliant. Cool. Well, I feel we could talk about wrestling matches forever, but conscious of time, Grappling Arts always going over time, but there we are, never mind. Maybe you could tell us a little bit, Sam, about your new film that you're currently in post-production of, right? So, yeah. So with all this background in wrestling and everything you've told us around your acting career and all your successes there, your most recent or kind of current will be coming out soon film is a short called Screwjob. I think is it your directorial debut? Is that right?
Yep.
Yes. So perhaps you could tell us a bit about Screwjob, how it came about, and what we can expect from this film.
So Screwjob is a short film that is currently in post-production. It's about a female pro wrestler, single mother, working class girl from Essex who is getting a bit frustrated but not getting the breaks. Injuries are piling up, and she gets put in a position where she has a dilemma about whether to take action that goes beyond the accepted action, let's just say. And it was born out of, I've wanted to, and again, when you've been acting for a while, you read a lot of scripts and you kind of go and you see people directing films and you go, you know what? I reckon I could do that. and I've been wanting to direct something for a while, even if just to be like, what would something that I directed look like and what would it feel like and be like? And then I thought, well, if I'm going to do a short film that I'm going to make, I might, because I know how hard it is to get a film made, even if it is a short film, I might as well make it a film that I would love to see. Like, what short film would I love to see? So I thought, put all of my, things that I'm swimming around in my head, my influences, and, some of the conversations I'm having with myself and, messages and themes that fascinate me, and put it all in the pot. And I was like, well, I reckon I want to do something about wrestling. And then I thought, because obviously the complete self-centered one would be to be like, right, it's a wrestling film, I'm the lead, I'm the wrestler, here we go. But because also, and again, I said at the beginning of the thing, I'm in total awe of professional wrestlers. I actually went and did a training session with Greg Burridge at Lucha Britannia after I worked with Greg with Stu Bennet in I Am Vengeance, which is on Netflix. And my God, it's the hardest training I've ever done. And not that I didn't have respect before, but after that, I was like, wow, this is one of the just truly special professions that exists. So I thought, I can't be, I was like, on a low budget without lots of training, I don't want to insult the audience and portray myself as a wrestler. That also might be to do with as well, I have a certain image of what a wrestler should look like as well. And I'm like, hey, 190 pounds, that's I'd want a 6-month period to get to some Davey Boy Smith territory. So anyway, so then I thought, well, how can I make a virtue of that? And then I thought, well, why don't I make the lead we've seen Mickey Rourke's the wrestler, and we've seen some other wrestling films, but what if it was a female wrestler? Why not? And then I started thinking, oh, that's actually quite interesting. And then what if the booker is male? And then you've got the male-female dynamic, which adds an extra bit of tension, romance, no romance, resentment, all that kind of stuff. And it kind of also, as well as that, it was also elements of, growing up in a working class area and feeling like you're not getting the opportunity, you're not getting the breaks, the powers that be are controlling a rigged system. And even though, as an actor, sometimes in my acting career, I felt like kind of like Bret Hart. You'd be like, everybody knows I'm great at this thing, but you're not giving me the shot. Give me a shot at the belt. So there was a bit of that energy, but I think it's also good to have with any like piece of art that you make. It's good to have a bit of fire behind it. So yeah, and then it was just kind of happened quite organically. Someone who I knew messaged me and said, by the way, you do know that I produce short films that have lead female characters in, like that's my gimmick, so to speak. So I was like, oh really? Well, I've got this thing, it's about a female wrestler, working class, and then this was Aletha Shepherd from Shot of Tea Productions, and then she's an amazing producer. She made it happen. We did a 2-day shoot, super low budget, and yeah, we're in post-production. We've done the final cut. We're now waiting. I'm securing a couple of music tracks, and yeah, then it'll be on to grading and post-production. But yeah, I'm really intrigued to see how it's received. It's like I'd say, even though it's set in wrestling, it should be something that non-wrestling fans can. And if anything, I want to reach. I like the idea of it making a splash in the wrestling world. But also I like the idea of it making a splash at film festivals where those kind of people and that kind of audience, wrestling either isn't on their radar or they dismiss it as an art form or as a sport. So that's, I guess, my little agenda of making that film. And I do have an idea for it to be a feature film. And again, I'd want it to be a feature film because one of my big influences on it was actually A Star Is Born, believe it or not, the Bradley Cooper film. So because I wanted to be about a relationship and like struggle, rather than it being, it's a wrestling movie for wrestling fans. It is, but I want it to cross over as well. So that's the backstory, I guess.
I'm really interested. I think I could pick out a million things there that I'm interested to talk more about, but I'm particularly interested in this idea of like kind of, in essence, kind of using wrestling to make a kind of broader comment on the rigged nature of life. Because we've talked quite a lot, Sam and I talk quite a lot, and I talk quite a lot of other people about wrestling as being something that kind of mirrors the world in really interesting ways. And I'm not sure I have a question other than to say, could you talk a little bit more about that? Because I'm just really interested in like the way, in essence, the way that those wrestling stories, some of which we've been discussing today, kind of throw a mirror up to some of the rigged nature of life, like to do with class and to do with gender, actually, that prevent people from, like, quote unquote, getting the belt or getting the push. As you've already talked about with your, in kind of acting circles. So yeah, did you have anything else to kind of add on that? I'm just super intrigued by it.
Yeah, I think, but it taps into all of what you've described is actually elements of human nature. I think no matter what system you set up, no matter what constitution a country writes, no matter what government is elected or what governing body is appointed or voted in, power corrupts, and corrupt power corrupts absolutely, as a wise man once said. So it's the nature of how we run things in the world, and it goes hand. It's in one way, there's a rigged system involved. I look at acting, for example, and on a simple level you can go, well, my dad was a taxi driver, not a director. My mum's is a hairdresser, not an agent. Whereas Mr. Actor over here that had privileged parents, got paid to go to Eton, that his casting director, family, friends watched him at his showcase when he was 18, and he never even had to go to drama school. He was just cast in the new Hugh Grant movie, and then he's off to the races, and he's won an Oscar by the time he's 27. So it's that, and you hear a lot of it. I love it when it comes out of professional wrestlers in their character. You could say, so when you listen to someone like Steve Austin and how bitter and angry he was about getting wasted at WCW and started cutting promos in ECW and just, having vitriol for Eric Bischoff. And then by the time he comes to WWF, he's been up and down the road, as they say, and he's there to prove a point. So I think it all goes hand in hand, but I think, I'm not saying there's an answer to any of this, but it's just a fascinating thing, because it is, because wrestling is a sport where the outcome is predetermined. Sometimes you can have the pure talent that is the best, but the person who is controlling the outcome just personally doesn't think so. So sometimes that can be horrible and heinous, unfair, abusive, or exploitative. Other times it can be just personal taste. I don't like your brand, mate, so I'd rather have this guy. And we've seen it with bookers in wrestling since time immemorial. You could say when you go to UFC and boxing, it's potentially more meritocratic, because if you knock this guy out or you knock this girl out, then you've won and you've earned the right to step up the ladder. But at the same time, there's politics even in boxing and UFC, and someone else might be deemed more worthy and might be deemed to have more box office power, right or wrong, and all this kind of stuff. So it's just an endlessly fascinating thing. But I love that element. What I do love about what I will say is that, and I think even this chimes through with films and wrestling and everything that I've gravitated towards, is and we all love watching an underdog fight against the odds. I think that's what can be so captivating, like Goldberg coming in on his own to face Hollywood Hogan and 30 members of the NWO, and just putting himself on the line and going for it. And I think that's what we look for in life, is those moments where you go, you know what, I'm all in, I'm jumping off the cliff because I want it and I'm willing to fail to get it. So I think that's hopefully what is in the film, and I think that's what I love, and what I don't know, it feels like it's like the human struggle, isn't it?
Yeah, great. Sam, this has been a wonderful, dynamic and fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for giving your time so generously to us this afternoon. It's been awesome. I feel like I'll be thinking about this for the whole of Bank Holiday weekend and beyond. So perhaps you could just tell us where we can find you, where we can find out more about Screwjob, what's coming up next for you that we can watch out for you in and about.
So I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Sam Benjamin now, NOW. I'm on Vero, if anyone's on Vero, at Sam Benjamin. So yeah, drop me a line, say hello, follow me, whatever you want to do. In terms of next things coming out, so if you haven't watched it and you want to watch a cheesy British 80s throwback action movie with Bad News Barrett, then I Am Vengeance Retaliation is on Netflix in the UK and US. Screwjob's in post-production, so I'll post when I have some news about that. And yeah, apart from that, it's just one of those where I'm auditioning, I've got other projects that I'm working on. I've got, like I said, we've got a crime caper feature film that an independent movie that we're making called The Payday. So again, we haven't started shooting that. We're hoping to shoot in the next couple of months. And yeah, apart from that, you know what? I'm just genuinely cannot wait to go to any wrestling event, sit in the crowd and watch some wrestling with other wrestling fans, other people, cheer and boo, get angry, get happy, and just get into the mixer with that again. Like, I don't know about you guys, but it's actually made me really, it's been, if there was any doubt, the power of live professional wrestling is untouchable, and also just it's just like the best form of theater, isn't it? It's just, you can't, as we've learned, you can't just have two people without a crowd. It's got to be, you got to have that spectacle and that story and that heroic and villainous activity as well. So I can't wait for that. I think it's like a lot of places are like, what is it, July and September in terms of UK. What about you guys? When's your
we are loosely looking at the autumn, so
okay.
Early autumn. Hopefully, we've got a couple of different projects that are kind of within the Resurgence kind of world, but not necessarily Resurgence canon, and that we're hoping to unveil fairly soon, and then probably a return to relative normality by the end of the year.
Yeah, it's probably a safer bet rather than disappoint.
Well, we'd love, like, it'd be great to see you at a show sometime, Sam, and come and cheer and boo with our crowd up in Nottingham and Leicester. It'd be wicked.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Thanks so much for joining us, Sam. It was brilliant to chat to you.
It was really interesting. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
No probs. We'll let you get on with your bank holiday.
Thank you for listening to the episode. For more episodes, including interviews with Spike Trevay, Gene Money, and Charlie Evans, search Grappling Arts on Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube.